There's a reason why some assets sit quietly for years and then suddenly it moves in a way that shocks people. And it usually isn't because something magically happened overnight. It's because people misunderstood the structure of that asset the entire time. Now, if you don't know me, I'm Camila Stevenson, and around here we talk wealth. And today I want to walk you through something that most people miss when they look at XRP. Most people are looking at the price and the charts. I always say this. And they often hear people say things like, there's a billion XRP out there. And so they assume that means that there's plenty available. But that assumption skips over something very important. XRP has a fixed supply, 100 billion units. That's the total number that will ever exist. No printing presses, no central bank deciding to create more later. The number is already defined. But the number that exists and the number that is actually available to be bought are two totally different things. And that difference is where supply shocks come in. Now, most people are thinking that markets price assets based on how much exists in total. But markets, they don't behave that way. Markets move based on what is available at the moment demand shows up. And that's the piece that people are overlooking. And once you understand how that mechanism works, then you can understand why certain assets can move far more aggressively than people expect if there's a supply shock. Now, what I want to do in this video is walk you through three things. First is the difference between total supply and what the market can actually access. Second is why large systems that rely on an asset tend to remove more and more of it from circulation over time. And then third, why the value of each unit eventually matters when an asset begins operating at scale. Now, before we get into this, quick reminder, this channel is only about education. And I just want to be clear that nothing here is financial advice. My goal is to help you understand how the system works so that you can make better decisions for yourself. And hopefully that leads to financial growth. Now, if you appreciate conversations like this, go ahead and like the video and subscribe if you have not already, and send this video to someone who needs to hear it. And comment and tell me, what are your thoughts about the supply shock? Is it something that you think can happen or not? I love and appreciate to hear from you. Now, I want to help you to understand again that yes, XRP has a fixed supply. And so the next step is really understanding something that a lot of people are not thinking about. And that is just because something exists does not mean it's available. Now, let me give you a simple example. Imagine a rare book that only had 100,000 copies printed. Okay. Now, technically, there are 100,000 copies in the world, but if 90,000 of those copies are sitting in private collections, libraries, or long-term archives where no one is selling them, then the market is not really dealing with 100,000 books. It's dealing with the small number that actually show up for sale. The value of that book in the market is determined by the copies that are actually available, not the ones locked away on someone's shelf. Financial markets work the exact same way. An asset can have a large total supply on paper, but if a significant portion of that supply is being held long-term or stored securely or sitting inside institutional custody, then the market isn't interacting with the full number. It's interacting with what is actually being offered. And this is where things become interesting when dealing with digital assets like XRP, because over time, portions of supply naturally stop moving. Some people are moving assets into cold storage and holding them for years. Some companies hold assets on their balance sheets, and some investors treat certain assets like long-term reserves rather than trading instruments like me. And once assets move into those categories, they technically still exist, but they stop participating in daily trading activity. That gradually reduces the amount of supply that the market can access at any given moment. And when demand begins increasing against a thinner and thinner pool of available supply, that's when price behavior can start to change quickly because availability became constrained. And once you understand markets in those terms, you realize something very important. Price is not reacting to how much exists. Price is reacting to how much is accessible when buyers show up, which leads to the next piece that most people are going to overlook, because certain types of systems don't just hold assets, they require inventory. And when that happens, supply can slowly move from being tradable to being operational. So let's talk about that next. Because see, some assets are traded and other assets are used. And when an asset begins serving a function inside a system, the way it circulates starts to change. Let me explain what I mean. Think about how airlines operate. Airlines don't wait until the day of the flight to go buy fuel at whatever the price happens to be that morning. That would be reckless. Instead, they secure supply ahead of time. They maintain reserves. They hedge fuel. They plan around the fact that the system they operate depends on that resource being available when it's needed. In other words, fuel becomes operational inventory. It's no longer something they casually trade in and out. It's something they keep on hand because their business depends on it. The same principle shows up across many industries. Manufacturers keep raw materials ready. Energy companies maintain reserves. Payment networks hold liquidity buffers. Systems that move value can't rely on hoping someone shows up with supply at the exact second it's needed. They keep inventory. Now apply that concept to financial infrastructure. If an asset is used as part of a settlement process, meaning it helps move value between parties or across borders, participants in that system don't operate without buffers. They hold inventory. That inventory doesn't constantly rotate through exchanges the way speculative trading supply does. It sits, it's reserved for operational use. And every time supply moves into that category, the amount that the market can freely trade becomes smaller. Now, this doesn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happens gradually. But the cumulative effect is powerful because the market doesn't care how many units exist in theory. The market cares how many units are available when demand arrives. And when demand begins rising against a thinner pool of available supply, prices again, they don't adjust slowly. They must adjust quickly, which leads to the final piece of the puzzle, because once an asset begins operating inside systems that move large amounts of value, something else starts to become important also, not just the availability, but the value contained in each unit. So let's talk about that. Now, once that asset begins operating in systems that move significant amounts of value, here is the question that arises. How efficiently can value move through it? Most people think of digital assets the way they think of stocks. They look at the prices and they ask whether it might go higher or lower. But infrastructure assets are evaluated a little differently. They're evaluated based on how much value they can move smoothly through the system. Let me explain this in simple terms. Imagine you're trying to move $1 billion through a financial network. If an asset facilitating that movement has a very small unit value, then you need a very large number of units changing hands to complete that transfer. That means more friction, more depth required in the order books, and more pressure on the available supply. But if each unit represents a larger amount of value, the same transaction can move with far fewer units. This means the system becomes more efficient, less strain on liquidity, and less dependence on enormous trading volume to clear transactions. This is why systems that move large flows of value often evolve toward assets that carry higher value density per unit. It simply makes the system easier to operate. Now, this doesn't mean price moves because someone decides it should. Markets never ever work that way. What happens instead is that demand begins interacting with the available supply, and over time, the market discovers the level where transactions can clear efficiently. So that process can be slow for years, and then suddenly it can accelerate when conditions align, which brings us back to the big picture. Most people spend their time trying to predict the exact moment something will move. But the more important question is whether you understand the structure behind it. Because if you understand the structure, you stop chasing all of the other stuff. All of it is just noise. All you need to do is position yourself. Focus on positioning, because positioning is what determines who benefits when the market finally recognizes what has been building underneath the surface all along. It is what it is. It's happening whether you see it or not. Will you get in or will you stay on the sidelines? So what I want you to do is just take a step back and look at this entire picture, right? We're not trying to figure out whether an asset exists. The real concern is whether it is available, whether it is needed, and whether the system that surrounds it is expanding. Because when availability shrinks, when systems begin relying on something operationally, and when scale begins increasing at the same time, markets are not going to just adjust in a calm way, right? They're going to move quickly. And that's why I say if you're outside of the positioning, then you'll miss it. All right. This is all about timing, and the timing is here for us to position ourselves. The people who tend to benefit from that kind of repricing are rarely the ones who waited for everything to make sense. You're too late at that point. As a matter of fact, when you hear everybody talking about it, also, you're a little too late. So the ones who win are the ones who built their structure early. Now, let me say something practical because it aligns with putting your structure in place early. If you are serious about holding digital assets for the long term and positioning yourself for the wealth transfer, then you need to think beyond just buying them. Okay. You have to think about where they live and how they're positioned. Okay. So one of the tools that I personally use is I Trust Capital because it allows you to place assets like XRP, gold, silver, Ethereum, whatever your cryptocurrency is that you believe in and you have conviction in. You can keep it inside of a retirement structure where the growth can compound without the normal tax payments that you would have to pay outside of that account. That means it can appreciate and you don't have to pay taxes on it, which is an amazing thing. Now, if you truly believe that these certain assets could appreciate significantly over time, then allowing those gains to grow inside of that Roth IRA framework can make a massive difference in the outcome. They've also built options for people who want stronger custody infrastructure. So instead of having assets scattered across different exchanges, you can hold them in accounts designed specifically for long-term storage and security. And I just love the thought of having an asset placed where it can appreciate and I can get the opportunity to eventually participate in yield or other ways that I can gain rewards on those assets. And also, this is something that a lot of people don't realize yet because this is new. They also offer treasury style accounts. So if you operate through an LLC, a trust, or any kind of business entity, you can start positioning assets at the company level as well, not just personally. And there is talk about them also having kids accounts. So I can't wait for that. But I've also added that treasury style account as well. So I'm excited about that because I know that this is how sophisticated investors think about wealth architecture. They are structuring their holdings. So if you decide to look into that, there is a $100 funding bonus through the link in the description that can help you get started. Now, I do also want to say there is a place for execution, and some people don't feel confident enough to do this on their own. So inside my coaching community, we spend time helping people translate these macro conversations into something very practical: how to allocate capital, how to layer risk, how to think about custody and taxes, and how to develop the mindset required to stay disciplined while markets move around you. Because the truth is, markets will test your psychology just as much as they test your analysis. If you want guidance building that kind of framework, the information for the community and the one-on-one coaching is also in the description. Now, I want to hear from your perspective after everything that we've talked about, the difference between supply and availability, operational inventory, and how scale changes the math. What do you think ultimately drives repricing in a market like this? Is it demand? Is it liquidity? Or is it the structure behind the system? Please drop your answers in the comments. I read them, and those kind of conversations help to sharpen the entire community. Now, if this breakdown did help you to see the bigger picture, make sure you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who wants to understand how these systems actually work instead of reacting to all of the noise, because we know it's too much noise around us and we really got to get it out of our space and zoom in and get focused so we can create generational wealth. And as always, I want you to stay wise, stay wealthy, and I'll see you in the next video.